Good afternoon. Let us continue our lecture on the sufficiently general theory of governance and start with some questions. Question: how can one detect imprints in one's own psyche and the psyche of loved ones? Will monitoring the behavior of relatives, analyzing the life of grandparents help? How is it possible to cleanse the imprints from the psyche? This question shows that the person who asked it did not understand what the imprinting component is. If you want to understand, to see what the algorithmics of your ancestral egregor is, then information about the life of older relatives in several generations can be useful for this. And the imprinting component of the psyche is characterized by the fact that it is unique for every person. Even identical twins, born at the same time, who are genetically identical to each other, who in fact have more or less the same spiritual heritage, due to the peculiarities of the biography of each of them, the imprinting component will have a certain originality. The imprinting component of the psyche, if one does not go into details, is the effect of the first impression. An effect that is, in many cases, indelible, and the imprinting component of the psyche is connected with the saying, which, in fact, is known thanks to the first sentence. Sow a deed, reap a habit. The subsequent is usually forgotten. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. The imprinting component is twofold in character. Firstly, it is not genetic, and this makes it a part of the culturally conditioned, individual components of the psyche, not innate, but adaptive. But on the other hand, the effect of the first impression, its indelibility, in many cases leads to the fact that in behavioral reactions, it also works alternatively as an innate component of the psyche, that is, unconditioned reflexes and instincts. Therefore, proceeding from this difference of the imprinting component and everything else that is in the psyche, it is necessary to find an approach on how to detect it, how to analyze it, and what to do with it. The first consists in the fact that this is really necessary because the imprinting mechanism allows one to very quickly master huge amounts of information. The child learns his native language and, in a multilingual environment, other languages on the basis of the imprinting mechanism. And when we try to learn foreign languages in adulthood, the imprinting mechanism no longer works, or we cannot connect it to this process. Therefore, for the majority of people, learning foreign languages is connected with difficulties that not everyone can overcome. And the following saying that exists in the East is related to this: teaching in youth, carving in stone, teaching in old age, writing on the sand. Therefore, the imprinting component should be treated as a given. Another question is that the imprinting component in a vicious culture includes a lot of things that should not be in the psyche of, well, let's say, a normal person. On this theme, I believe it was G.A. Shishko who said, "Alcoholism does not begin with the first glass drunk. Alcoholism begins with the first glass that the child sees in the hands of his father and mother. If the child sees this very first glass in the hands of his parents, then the imprinting mechanism begins to work, and a pattern of behavior is fixed that you can drink, because in early childhood, parents have unconditional trust from the standpoint of their children. Therefore, the imprinting component of the majority is indeed infected with many ethically and psychologically incorrect behavioral programs. You can detect them by analyzing your own behavior, analyzing your aspiration, and then the attitude towards it is simple. Because if you understand that something from the imprinting component creeps out that prevents you from living, something that discredits you in the eyes of others and damages your physical and psychic health, then you should have the will in order to say to imprinting programs of this kind, stop, and to work out an alternative to them, which in situation stimuli would automatically go off and keep on working instead of the original imprinting program. That is, these are all things that require an attentive relation towards oneself and a creative relation towards one's own future. Next question. How does God address the global governance on the part of the Russian state, the communities of the Aryan Slavs, representatives of the Russian Zhretshud, carriers of the Hyperborean cultural tradition? Almost everyone who took the side already knows about the Hierophants. You see, this is not a question that should be addressed to me. This is a question to God. Ask God yourself. Look at life. Well, and understand the simple thing that God does not eradicate previousness. So, had all the listed and not listed cultures been previous, they would not have disappeared into historical non-being. Well, a lot of what is now called the revival of ancient cultures is a modern fiction, a fantasy about what was in antiquity, and it has nothing to do with what really happened in the past. Therefore, these kinds of questions, they require a very critical perception. And, in fact, in everyday life, it is rather difficult to obtain information about the reliability or falsity of this or that conception of the past, and it is not always possible. Personal development, which allows you to enter into the memory of the noosphere and receive information from there, is anyway required. Next question. Cognition and creativity. What is the fundamental difference? What cognition is, everyone understands. Usually, cognition is understood as the cognition of what exists. Creativity is understood as the creation of something that did not exist in the past, or that has been very circumstantially forgotten. If we talk about creativity precisely as the pioneering discovery of something, but not about the creation of something based on the knowledge and skills that exist in culture, and on the fact that there is information, that there are analogues to what you are going to create. This is also creativity, but this is individual creativity. But let's look at creativity in the aspect of pioneering discovery. Creativity, in the aspect of pioneering discovery, is a consequence of cognition of possibilities. Because even if you create something intuitively, based on a sudden guess, and as a result, you achieve a positive result, it is still a consequence of the fact that on the unconscious levels of the psyche, you felt some possibilities and created such a thing or a process that has a place in the matrix of possible states. If you are not able to cognize the possibilities that open the way to the result, then creativity becomes impossible. Therefore, in the conception of social safety, cognition and creativity are never separated and not opposed to each other, because creativity nevertheless begins with cognition of the possibility and the incarnation of the result into life. This is the final stage of creativity. Well, this is from where further commentary flows. Question commentary. What I used to consider creativity turned out to be a banal cognition after I designed the image of a terminal, and 15 years later, I saw it on the internet in the form of some kind of greenhouse pavilion in Spain. And it was the same. My brain worked like an ESP adept through space and time. For example, supporters of cacophonic music are champions at pressing the keyboard in sickening combinations. In addition, I am seriously engaged in folk culture, the vocals, dance, and the Russian people, it turns out, varies greatly, but they don't allow any cacophony. And before I thought that folk art was erroneous. At the institution in the 1980s, other things were hammered into our heads. By the way, at the seminars in Siberia, on the basis of Ivashko from Shedrovitsky, design was considered the creation of a completely new need, and the usual normal design was pejoratively called constructing, imaginary design, or something else. Well, everything that concerns Shedrovitsky, we have a generally negative attitude towards him, because he factually replaced the methodology of cognition and creativity as an art with some kind of organizational activity games. And life is arranged in such a way that many things are not realizable in the conditions of a training area and games. They require that a person dare to address a real problem, for the solution of which, at the time of addressing it, he has no ready-made recipes. And these recipes are worked out only in contact, in interaction with real problems. These recipes cannot be worked out in a training area, when there is no risk not to make trouble for yourself or for those around you. There is such a feature. Well, in fact, it is quite a long conversation on the themes of creativity as creativity. And creativity as combinatrix from something already known. Well, these are different facets of creativity. Question. What is your attitude towards the work of Valentin Picul? Twofold. On the one hand, Picul, at one time, showed an interest in history, and the spread of his literature in society aroused a wide interest in the study of history. And on the other hand, Pikul himself quite often showed simply blatant incompetence, even in those questions that, it would seem, he should have known thoroughly. Well, here is one example. He describes a sea battle. It takes place on the destroyer Novik. The loading process is described. A unitary cartridge is put into the charger, and then the charge. You see, a unitary cartridge is a unitary cartridge. In it, both the projectile and the charge pushing the projectile out of the gun are combined into a single whole. That is why it is called unitary. And separate case loading is another matter. And Pickle, as a graduate of the Jung school, should not have written such nonsense about naval affairs. Well, and in addition, in a number of cases, he allowed the substitution of historical authenticity with gossip that circulated in society or was inherited from the past, or substituted the historical documented authenticity known from other sources with his own conjectures. Therefore, the past, in his works, is very different from what it was, although this is really fascinating reading for many people. It aroused people's interest in history, in the study of history. So, I have a twofold attitude. Question: what percentage of the brain works? How to return to what Khomyakov called inner consciousness? Well, what percentage of the brain works is an individual question. It depends on the individual, what percentage of it works. And how to return to what Khomyakov called inner consciousness? The answer is simple. To learn, by volitional order, to stop the flow of thinking at the level of your own consciousness. When there is no fuss at the level of consciousness, that which rises from the unconscious levels of the psyche, it rises by itself, and rises brighter and fuller, the less consciousness interferes with this manifestation. This is a matter of internal discipline. There is also a false path. A small dose of alcohol removes the barrier between the unconscious and conscious levels of the psyche and allows information from the unconscious levels of the psyche to more actively penetrate the level of consciousness. Well, from this comes the saying, what is on the mind of the sober is on the tongue of the drunk. Well, and the second layer of this saying is that what cannot break through to the level of consciousness of a sober person can easily rise to the level of consciousness of a slightly drunk person. But for such a stimulation of intellectual activity, at short-term intervals of stimulation, at long-term intervals of life, a person ultimately pays with personal degradation. Therefore, this variant is bad, and one must learn how to conduct a dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious levels of the psyche. In general, this is the first part of Fundamentals of Sociology, in a 6-volume version. Next question. First, why was no one able to understand that the boy from Urengoy spoke at the Bundestag with a peacekeeping mission? You see, the peacekeeping mission is twofold. Because in one variant, peacekeeping mission is expressed in simple words. We have no complaints against you. We have forgiven you for the fact that your ancestors did this, that, and the next thing. Let us build a common future. This is one variant of the peacekeeping mission. The second variant of the peacekeeping mission is capitulation. And when there are such words as the so-called Stalingrad cauldron, and the German comrade who reached Stalingrad with weapons in his hands in the battle formations of the Wehrmacht, and died, well, by strength of the fact that the Soviet command and Soviet governance of the rear and front turned out to be more effective than Hitler's. That comrade is not an innocent victim, because he had other possibilities. Well, for example, it is known that one Alfred Liscow swam across the Bug River on the night of June the 22nd and warned the Red Army of imminent attack the next morning. There was Fritz Schmienkel. In 1941, he surrendered and joined the partisans. He died in 1944 in battles with the Wehrmacht and is a hero of the Soviet Union. Before the war, many people, had the hope that if Hitler unleashed a war against the Soviet Union, then a socialist revolution would take place in Germany, and the Hitler regime would fall as a result of this. But in 1944, according to the Gestapo, more than half of Germans saw Hitler as the only person who could lead Germany, if not to victory in the war, then at least to an honorable peace. Therefore, there is no need to talk about the innocent Germans who died in the Stalingrad region. Moreover, if we talk about the fate of the prisoners, then those who surrendered at Stalingrad were simply not lucky, because out of 90,000 or so of those who surrendered, about 6,000 returned to Germany. But this is a dropout from the statistics that characterize the general fate of German prisoners of war in the Soviet Union. Such large sacrifices are conditioned by the fact that the command of the Red Army actually was not prepared to take such a mass of prisoners and provide them with everything. Because when the Stalingrad operation was completed, firstly, it was the middle of winter. The climate in that zone is continental. There were frosts. Those who surrendered, for the most part, were already exhausted by what can be called everyday disorder and hunger in the Stalingrad cauldron. That is, they were already on the road to death themselves for the reasons that took shape in the prehistory of the defeat of the Germans at Stalingrad. And they could only be pulled out by massive intensive therapy, which the Soviet Union, in such quantities, in the conditions of war, in the conditions of the economy destroyed by the same Germans. Well, they could not provide them. They were simply unlucky. But they are by no means innocent victims of war. And if Kolya himself did not understand this, then the teachers should have explained it to him. Well, the teachers explained to him something else, and Kolya appeared in the Bundestag as a typical liberal half-wit. Question: what was Fresco's mistake about, and who was behind him. Fresco's mistake was that he did not take up the question of the essence of man and the difference between man and all other representatives of the biosphere of the planet Earth. The questions of overcoming the civilizational crisis are not resolved by replacing the technosphere, formed on the basis of the achievements of fundamental science of the 18th-19th centuries, with a technosphere which can be built on the basis of the achievements of science of the 20th-21st centuries. In order to solve the problem of civilization, a different pedagogical culture is required, so that a newborn of the biological species Homo sapiens, by the beginning of adolescence, would take place in the quality of human. Fresco did not deal with this problem, although what he accomplished under the conditions of life in which he was born is indeed an intellectual feat. Who was behind him? You see, this is not a completely correct formulation of the question, because many things result from personal initiative. Another thing is that in crowd elite societies, no personal initiative stays ownerless for very long. Always someone picks it up and finds a use for it, or destroys its carriers. Therefore, if we turn to the reality of the United States, then, in the end, Fresco was taken under the guardianship of the local Masonic hierarchy. Question: why did the IP of the USSR leave the category of matter in the triunity? After all the existence of matter in general, no one has yet registered in creation, and all that we are dealing with, in fact, is an infinite number of transformations in accordance with measure and measured images transmitted to the soul. Thank you. Well, indeed, matter in general does not exist. Matter in general is a linguistic construction that names the entire set of concretics of the aggregate states of matter that occur in nature, starting from the physical vacuum and ending with matter in its various forms. Therefore, the internal predictor of the USSR left the category, matter in general, precisely as an abstraction, which in a few words denotes the entire plurality of aggregate states of matter that physics, chemistry, biology, and technical disciplines deal with in their subject domains. Question: the book by Concordia Antarova, Two Lives, as Wikipedia says, the book describes the ideas of Theosophy and Agni Yoga. At the moment I have read the fifth part of the book. The book interested me with its ideas and thoughts. The book, as it was alleged, was dictated to the author. Are you familiar with this work? If so, what can you say about this piece? No, I am not familiar with this work. Agni Yoga was read by us. The perception of Agni Yoga as something epochal, significant for the future, it is possible only if a person is indifferent to the problem of the metrological consistency of humanitarian disciplines. Because all sorts of words that cannot be correlated with reality are pronounced and written. Well, for example, in the works of N. Rurich, there is such a term, cosmic magnet. What is it? What is behind these words? If there is no guru, you will never understand it yourself. When we were working out the materials of the conception of social safety, we made sure that such situations would not arise. Therefore, we have nothing to do with such books. Question: what is a nervous tic and how to get rid of it? This may be the consequence of a psychic disorder. It may be a consequence of a disturbance in the structures of the nervous system. Getting rid of this in each case is different. If this is a psychic disorder, then you just need to calm down, move on to a different mood. If these are some disturbances in the functioning of the nervous system caused by damage to its structures, this is different. Question: how do you understand the meaning of the ayats of the Quran? We send not down the angels save with the fact, and in that case, the disbelievers would not be tolerated. This should be understood as follows, that while a person is in ignorance about something, the Almighty does not lay on him claims related to mistakes arising from this ignorance. But after the truth has been brought to a person, he himself carries the responsibility. And references to "I did not know," they no longer work. They are not accepted, because the truth was brought to the attention of the person, in this particular case, by sending a notifying angel. Question: we, who is this? Egregors? You see, we evaluate the ancient text from the point of view of the grammar of the modern language. In ancient times, the plural we was sometimes used as a carrier of the sense of superiority. So, when Nikolai II was titled, "We, the Emperor of all Russia," this does not mean that he had schizophrenia, and he thought of himself as a plurality of people. We, in this case, is a grammatical form that signifies superiority over all others. It is the same in the Quran. We is a grammatical form, which I understand as the absolute, overwhelming superiority of the Almighty over everything else that is in creation. Question: how can you distinguish more effective remedies in nature from those offered in medicine? In general, these are questions of concretics. The concretics of the disease, the concretics of the individuals. Well, in fact, life is such that what is a remedy for one person can be a poison for another person. Therefore, you need to develop your personal culture of senses and understanding of what is brought by the senses. If we do not talk about severe, neglected cases, then you just need to learn not to hinder your organism from maintaining its own health. What is needed for this? Well, first of all, for this, you need to restore your normal ethical relationship with the Almighty. In this case, there will be no disease as a means of slowing you down in some non-God-pleasing activity. There may be some kind of disease, disorder, bodily injury as an external stimulus for personal development, which is used simply as a consequence of the fact that you turned out to be deaf to some hints earlier. Question: Is it possible to put an equal sign between two concepts, objective-oriented function of governance and governing impact? No, one cannot do this. Because the objective-oriented function of governance is one of the algorithms for achieving an objective, and the governing impact is already an implementation of an algorithm in the process of real governance. Question: How can I distance myself rightly and previously, especially from my ex-relatives by biofield, by blood, who do not want to live previously, from egregors and villainous subornal intellects, and from those relatives whose existence I did not know about, and could not even know about their belonging to certain special governors too? Is it enough to say every time that he is not my relative?
Достаточно ли каждый раз говорить, что он мне не родственник?
Well, if he is your relative, then to say that he is not your relative is an attempt to deceive yourself. In fact, you cannot distance yourself from the society in which you live. You can change your own relation towards this society. In the process of personal development, you can change the structure of your psyche, and, accordingly, you can change your egregorial status. As for the relatives who do not behave the way you think fit, well, in fact, pedagogical practice as helping others in personal development is also a part of our life. If you don't deal with it, you can distance yourself from them, cut off communication with them when they appear in front of you, ignore them, or chase them away. But it will not be previous, because previous is to move them to personal development and achieve success in this. Usually, in everyday life, the Russian words правильно, rightly, and праведно, previously, are synonyms. When the question of differences comes up, then, about previousness, they prefer to forget, and, under rightly, they understand distancing without consequences. But there will be consequences, if not in the form as you imagine them, then in a different form. From those problems that you are destined to solve, you can never get away without solving these problems. You can get away from them only by solving these problems yourself. Question: What else can be done if a very long self-digging with a deep search for the reasons for the erroneousness of Nravia standards, sincere repentance, change of intentions towards previous actions that are confirmed, did not bring any effect, did not open any new abilities, and most importantly, possibilities, and you tried to change your Nraviousness towards previousness with all your effort, and you are in such a state as if all this was done in vain, or almost uselessly? Well, the question is not entirely clear. Because what effect did the person want to achieve? Comfort? If comfort, then this is not necessarily the correct thing, because as a result of such actions, if they are not really completely done and to the end, then abilities should arise that enable solving the remaining problems, unless, of course, these problems are of an irreversible character. Because if you have done something, it is not always possible to wind it back. Question: how can a person restore his connection with the Almighty if he clearly noticed, checked for a long time, that someone is trying to imitate him and his appeals in the language of life, and not only in relation to him, but also in relation to the people around him, and so vividly showing that allegedly he doesn't need to contact God? Appeals and prayers are not selfish, not spiteful, some are actually, on the contrary, were performed brightly and indicatively, with an unequivocal hint that it would be worse if he continued, as if deliberately trying to undermine trust towards God, and force the person to break off communication with him. Here it is twofold. First, religions are of two types. Egregorial religions, when a dialogue is conducted with some egregors, and the power of egregors, in some cases, allows one to govern a lot of things in such a way that there will be a complete illusion that this is the answer of the Almighty. The twofoldness is that if a person can do something himself, then the Almighty will never do it for him. In addition, interference in the destiny of other people is not always good, because if life presents every person with a certain set of tasks for development, his personal development, then he should solve these tasks himself. But it is not you, as an older friend or more experienced one, who must solve these tasks and present him with the result and free him from the solution. That is, if mom and dad solve tasks for a first grader and he gets excellent scores, this is not the right pedagogy. In the life of adults, situations of this kind can also arise. Well, then, the main question is that the voice of Sovest must be distinguished from all other internal voices. And if you distinguish the voice of Sovest and the voice of shame from among all other internal voices, then immediately, easily and simply, you will detect all kinds of egregorial possessions. Question: please explain why yoga is psychological hacking. After all, doing conscious actions, everyone wants to get a predetermined result. Who gave these techniques or allowed them to be used? The Almighty? After all, going to a psychologist, people do not want to understand the problems through life situations, but to be helped. Anyway they go, being conscious of the problem and impossibility of solving it on their own. Perhaps studying, for example, yoga, people self-develop to solve the tasks given by the Almighty. Is studying the sufficiently general theory of governance hacking? Thank you. So the question of yogas is connected with the question of how personal development differs from degradation and absence of personal development. If there is no personal development and you enter yoga, then you do certain actions under the guidance of a mentor and get a really predetermined result, a programmed result. The next question is how you will use this knowledge and skills. If your nraviousness and aspirations in life arising from raviousness do not correspond to the stream of providence, then you will inevitably face the fact that the use of this knowledge will be accompanied by some side effects. And if we talk about how the conception of social safety relates to such side effects that restrain a person's activities, in this or that way cause him one or the other bodily or psychic damage, then in the conception of social safety, it is about the fact that no matter how far a person has advanced in mastering paranormal and supernormal abilities, he should be in harmony with the Almighty. That is, you see, the task is not in mastering this or that yoga, or not mastering this or that yoga. The task is about a different thing. The task is to build your personal relationship with the Almighty, and, on this basis, to go through life. In this case, if you need some knowledge and skills, abilities that you don't have, they will be given to you in the form that, in Orthodoxy, is called the gifts of the Holy Spirit. But this is already a guarantee that in personal development, you have achieved such that you cannot abuse this given to you knowledge and skills. Yoga is psychological hacking from our point of view for the simple reason that the question of the relationship with the Almighty is not put in it at all, or is put somewhere in the background. Question. In the book by O.G. Markeyev, The Golden Gate, the hero governs an English general through his astral body, giving an order to attack submarines. Is it real? Yes, this is real. There are psychotechniques that enable you to enter into someone else's algorithmics of the psyche and replace the meaningful will of another individual with your own meaningful will. But this is all within the boundaries of allowance. Question. How do you assess the activities of Vissarion and his followers from the standpoint of the conception of social safety? A special 1996 analytical note is devoted to this theme. Look at sites that have materials on the words, the Last Testament. Why, when calling to the kingdom of God on earth, the internal predictor does not accept the Last Testament? Everything is written there. Question. How is the triunity of matter-information measure correlated with will? Is will some kind of derivative of the triunity of matter-information measure, or something independent of it? Is man the source of his own will? If so, how can he generate it? Will, in the conception of social safety, is understood as the ability to subjugate oneself and the course of events around to the consciously perceived purpose consonance. Will is realized through the triunity, including through the triunity represented by the human organism in both its hypostases, the material component and the biofield component interacting with it. To manifest your will, you must manifest will. In order to manifest will, a conscious purpose consonance is required. Will always acts from the level of consciousness. Question. A. A. Shabalov's book, page 97, says that in the country, in actual fact, there is deflation. Is this
Планета
true?
вращается по
The planet
спирали, как
spins along a
вращается
spiral.
ситуация.
How does the
Пришел с
sun
тем, чтобы
spin?
люди
Buddha
развивали
came in
свой
order for people to
микроскоп.
develop their
Пришел с тем,
micro-universe.
чтобы люди
Will
развивали
this
свой
knowledge also be
микросвет.
revealed on the path of
Эти
providence?
знания тоже откроются на пути промысла. На пути
Any
промысла
knowledge
откроются
will open
новые
on the path of
знания при
providence
условии, что
on
они
condition that it is
безопасны
safe
для
for the
развития
development of
цивилизации,
civilization,
что
that
нет
there is no one
никого,
who could
кто бы
abuse this
мог этими
knowledge.
знаниями злоупотребить. Что
As for
касается
the
первых
first two
двух
questions
вопросов,
on both
дефляции
deflation
и
and
вращения
the rotation of the sun,
погуглите,
Google
почитайте
it, read fundamental
фундаментальную
literature.
литературу. Ну, дефляция в классике
Deflation in the
экономической
classics of
теории
economic
это
theory
повышение
is an
покупательной
increase in the
способности
purchasing power of a
денежных
monetary
единиц.
unit.
Либерально-рыночные теории
Liberal
дефляцию
market
не любят,
theories do not
считают
like
ее злом,
deflation.
поскольку
They
с ней
consider it an
связан
evil,
рост
since the
безработицы.
rise in unemployment is connected with it.
Реально,
In
либерально-рыночные
reality,
теории
liberal
это
market
выражение
theories are an
управленческого
expression of
безграмотности на
governorial
макро.
illiteracy at the macro
Потому
level.
что если смотреть на уровне макро,
Because
то
if you look at the
рост
level of macro,
покупательной
then
способности
an
денежной
increase in the
единицы,
purchasing power of a monetary
снижение
unit,
цен
a decline in
это
prices, is an
выражение
expression of the work
работы
of the
экономики
economy
на
towards
удовлетворение
satisfying
общественных
social needs,
потребностей, когда по мере
when, to the measure of the
удовлетворения
satisfaction
социальных
of the needs
потребностей
and
и
the growth of
роста
labor productivity,
производительности
the
труда,
price is
цена
reduced in order to expand the
снижается
circle
для
of
расширенного
consumers of these or those
пользования
goods or services.
потребителей тех или иных товаров или услуг. Но
But
поскольку в
since in the
ходе
course of
такого
such
развития
development,
темпы
the paces of
развития разных
development of
отраслей
different
разные,
sectors are different,
то могут
there may be
возникать
intersectoral
межотраслевые
imbalances,
диспропорции как
both
в
in the purchasing power of working
покупательной
capital
способности работорговельных средств,
and in the
так и
production
по
capacity in their
производственным
physical
мощностям в их
terms.
натуральном выражении. Вот эти диспропорции надо
These
своевременно
imbalances
устранить.
must
Это
be
задача
eliminated in a timely manner.
макроэкономического управления,
This is the task of
государственного
macroeconomic
управления.
governance, state
То,
governance,
что дефляция и
and the
экономический
fact that
рост
deflation and
вполне
economic growth
совместимы,
are quite
и даже
compatible,
более того,
and even
дефляция
more.
является
Deflation is one of the
одним
instruments
из
for creating investment
инструментов
resources. This was
создания
shown by the history of the USSR
ресурсов.
after
Это
the monetary
показали в
reform
истории
of
СССР после
1947,
денежной реформы
when the country
1947
successfully
года,
developed until
страна
1953
успешно
in the mode of
развивалась до
annual
1953
systematic price
года в
reduction.
режиме ежегодного планомерного снижения цен. Где
Where
Шабалов
Shabalov
увидел
saw
дефляцию, я
deflation,
не
I don't know,
знаю, потому что в нашей
because in
стране
our country,
с
since Soviet times,
еще
prices have
советского
been growing
времени
all the
цены
time.
все время растут. Они растут
They grow
и
intensively
среди
in post-Soviet times
постсоветских
as well.
времена, так я просто
So I will
напомню,
just
что
remind
в
you
2004
that in around
году весь
2004,
бензин у нас
in our
стоил в
country,
пределах
all
13
gasoline
рублей
cost
за
around
литр.
13 rubles per liter.
Сейчас весь бензин у нас стоит на уровне 40 рублей за
Now, all
литр.
gasoline is at the level of 40 rubles per liter,
Как с
a
этим
threefold
связаны
rise in
реальные
prices.
доходы населения, это вопрос уже другой. Какому
How
Богу
the
вы
real incomes of the
обращаетесь?
population are connected
К
with this?
Всевышнему,
This is
Творцу
another
Вседержителю.
question.
Вы
Question:
знаете, что была
What God do
война
you talk
богов.
to?
Богов
To the
написано
Almighty,
заглавной
the
буквой.
Creator.
Я
Question:
знаю, что
Do you
были
know that there was a
войны
war of gods?
между теми
Gods is
субъектами,
written with a capital
которых
letter.
люди в древние
I know
времена
that there were
именовали
wars between those subjects whom people in ancient times called gods.
безосновательно,
They called them
поскольку
gods
Бог
without
один,
reason,
и нет
since there is
других,
only one God,
кроме Него богов.
and there are no other gods
А все
besides Him,
остальное это
and
богословие
everything
самих
else
людей.
is idolatry by people themselves.
Нашей
Question:
планеты
All
сосутся
resources
ресурсы
are being
активно,
sucked out of our
идет
planet
геноцид
at an
людей.
active pace. The genocide of people is ongoing.
Идет не геноцид,
It
идет
is not genocide,
самогеноцид.
it is self-genocide. Question:
Вы защитили бы
Would you
своего
protect your
ребенка,
child
если
if
бы
he
на
was
него
attacked?
напали? Как вы
Why do you
думаете,
think God
почему
cannot
Бог
protect
не
His
может
child?
защитить свое дитя? Бог может, Но Бог
God
никогда
can,
не будет
but
делать
God will never
то,
do what a
что
person can
человек
and should do
может и
himself.
должен сделать сам. Для
In order
того,
for the
чтобы
person to
человек
do many
сделал
things
сам
himself,
многие вещи,
the
информация,
information
необходимая
necessary
для
for this
этого,
was given a
стандартная
long time ago.
исходные
Initial
откровения
revelations to
Моисею,
Moses,
потом
Christ,
Мухаммаду,
Muhammad
они не были
were not wanted.
востребованы, они
They
были
were supplanted by
вычтены
self-concoctions.
отсебятиной.
Well, and who
Мы
should be
не можем
responsible
за
for
это
this?
отвечать. Есть тот сон душ, который именуется человечеством.
There is that host of souls
Если
called
вы
humanity.
хотите
If
жить
you want to
в
live like a human,
человечестве, то надо
then
становиться
you have to
человеком.
become a human.
К этому надо прилагать
This
определенные
requires certain
усилия.
meaningful effort.
Вот, значит, на вопросы мы ответили.
We have answered the questions.
Вопросов много.
There are many
20
questions,
с
more than
лишним
20.
штук. Ну, я
I would
хочу
like to draw
обратить
your
внимание,
attention to the
что
fact that
большинство
most of
из
these
этих
questions
вопросов к
have nothing to
тематике
do with
курса
the theme of the
«Достаточно
course,
общая
the
теория
sufficiently
управления»
general theory of
не
governance.
имеют никакого отношения. Многие вопросы – это
Many questions are an
выражение
expression
того,
of the
что
fact
их авторам не
that their authors
хочется
do not want to Google,
погуглить,
look at
посмотреть на
life,
жизнь, воспринять
perceive
жизнь
life,
и
and
подумать
think
самим.
for themselves.
Хочется получить готовые ответы
They would like to
на эти
receive
вопросы.
ready-made answers to these
Многие
questions.
вопросы
Many
просто
questions are
разумные
just idle
вопросы.
curiosity.
Вот от этой практики
It is
надо
necessary to
потихонечку
gradually move
отходить.
away from this practice.
Надо учиться
We must learn to
воспринимать
perceive
мир
the world on our own,
самостоятельно,
learn to
учиться
meaningfully and consciously
осмыслять и
comprehend what is
воспринимать
perceived,
результат интеллектуальной
correlate the
деятельности,
result of intellectual
соотносить
activity
с
with the reality
реальностью
of life,
и корректировать его в
and
тех
correct
случаях,
it
когда
in cases where
житейская
everyday
практика не
practice does
подтверждает
not confirm the truth of our
истинность
intellectual products.